All right, we are back here. We talked about the Jets camp a few weeks ago. Now we're going to go to Giants camp here. Joining me today covers the Giants for the Star-Ledger. Great friend of the podcast, Darryl Slater is here. Darryl, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on here. And obviously, camp is underway. They reported last week. A lot of stuff going on here. What's your general thoughts on Giants camp and what you've seen thus far?
Oh, well, I mean, a lot to digest, certainly. I guess broadly, there's a lot of moving pieces on defense, especially in the secondary. And then offensively, some questions on their offensive line about who starts. And, Daniel Jones will look mostly fine, but, take it with a grain of salt.
Absolutely here. And obviously the big headline of last week, and very important for the Giants here, they managed to get Saquon Barkley into camp. They give him a one-year deal, a little bump over what the franchise tag would have been here. So how important was that for the Giants to get Saquon into camp and avoid the distraction of potential holdout?
Yeah, I mean, well, it seems like, they put that to bed pretty quickly, and now it just feels like a distant storyline. At this point, we all thought it was going to drag on into camp. It did not. He reported, he signed, he got $909,000 in fairly tough to attain incentives that are all tied to the Giants making the playoffs and him having a really good year. So he's essentially playing on the franchise tag, and I think it is important for them and important for him that he was going to get in there, and he was not going to do himself any favors by skipping a long stretch of camp, entering what is going to be a prove-it year, regardless of how much of a fit he threw. After July 17th, it's a prove-it year no matter what, right? There's nothing he could do to go back and get really a multi-year deal out of them. So he decided to not take their offers during the season or right at the deadline there, and he's betting on himself, and we'll see how that works out.
Yeah, it's a really interesting spot for him because obviously there's a lot of disgruntled running backs around the league claims that he doesn't get paid anymore. So obviously you want to see how Saquon sort of takes it during the season in terms of if he shows a little frustration throughout the campaign.
I think it'll be a pro. I mean, he's been a pro. Obviously, these guys, he's been a pro throughout his career, but obviously there's a lot of emotion involved in this, and you're talking about guys' livelihood and long-term financial security. And as we've talked about and people have talked about, he had an opportunity to get a significant amount of money, reportedly $26 million over the first 2 years of the deal, in terms of practical guarantees, and he decided to not do that, and they offered him just north of the two franchise tags combined, about 23-ish, right before the deadline there on July 17th. He decided to not take that. And so there's obviously no guarantees that the Giants will tag him next year. He needs to have a really good year to even put himself in position to even be tagged. If he really struggles or he gets hurt, they're going to let him walk, and they'll start over, and he'll be in a situation where he'll not be making much money next year. But obviously that's not how he looks at it. He's looking at it through a confident and optimistic lens, and we'll see how things play out. He's obviously going to be a big part of what they do, even with the addition of Darren Waller. We all know that Saquon Barkley will be an enormous part of this offense.
Yeah, absolutely here. And obviously, the other big headlines from guys who did get paid here, Daniel Jones has his new contract here. He gets paid roughly, it's basically 2 guaranteed years, about $40 million a year. He's gone for year through 15 touchdown passes, but played a much more clean brand of football overall here. So what are the expectations here for Daniel Jones right now as he tries to build on what he did last year?
Yeah, you got 2-year, $82 million contract, essentially. Just forget whatever any other numbers you hear. That's essentially what it is. There's an escape hatch after 2024. If he stinks, the Giants can move on. And quite frankly, if he's really bad this year, maybe they draft a quarterback next year. I don't know. That's getting way ahead of things. But he's shown no reason in this training camp for anyone to think that he's gonna go back to being an inconsistent player. But again, we're talking about 10 practices. Most of which are not in pads. They didn't get into the pads till the 5th or 6th day of camp. They're doing joint practices as we speak here, Tuesday and Wednesday, with the Lions in Detroit, which will be an interesting test for the Giants. I presume they won't play their starters on Friday night in the preseason opener. Certainly, Daniel Jones is almost certainly not going to play. And yeah, I think obviously this is a really tough schedule. We all know about the stretch of road games early on, and this is his chance to prove that he is a guy who's worth spending $82 million on over the course of 2 years. The Giants really didn't have much choice, considering the situation they were in, where they were drafting, all that. They had to commit to him. They didn't commit crazy long-term. But they did get a deal done, obviously, before the tag deadline, which will let them tag Saquon Barkley. And so I would say productive offseason for Joe Shane, obviously. His roster is not yet fully polished and complete. But Daniel Jones does have more weapons around him, most notably Darren Waller. If he's able to stay healthy, I think will be certainly a big asset to the passing game. And we'll see if his team could stretch the field a little bit more. They were the worst deep ball passing team in the league in terms of 20-plus yard games over the past 2 years. I think second to last year before that in 2020. So they've been a disaster in terms of long passing games, whether you count that as deep balls or catch and runs. They have to get better there. So let's see how that manifests itself as Daniel Jones tries to show that he was worth all that money.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned Darren Waller here, who I think that was a creative job by Joe Shane. You look at the receiver market this offseason, it was not very good, and they needed more weapons here. So trading for Waller, it felt like a natural fit for the Giant offense. Like, how has he looked at camp in terms of how he's fitting in with the Giant system?
Really good. I mean, again, this all comes with a grain of salt. We're talking about 10 training camp practices, as I said like a few minutes ago. A lot of these are not in pads. Okay, so let's just pump the brakes a little bit on anyone who's having a great camp or whatever so far. I think certainly, if someone's really, really struggling out there, that merits some attention. But someone is having a quote unquote great camp or whatever. Let's calm down here. It's early, but I mean, certainly a guy performing well is Daniel Jones having a solid camp, albeit under these bubble-like circumstances, is better than him looking like a disaster, obviously. So the same goes for Darren Waller. He's been really good. They've been targeting him a lot. He looks like a mismatch problem, certainly against the Giants slot cornerback situation, which is not great. So yeah, I think if he stays healthy, and that's been a big if given his recent track record, then I think he could be an enormous asset for this Giants offense.
Yeah, also the receivers, I want to get your take on this room. It's very interesting because they have a lot of guys in that room with some of them have sort of redundant skill sets. You have a lot of slot types. You have a couple of deep guys. You have Isaiah Hodgins back here. Like, how do you think this room shakes out in terms of who you think makes the 53?
Well, I think that is an interesting question, and also the pecking order too. Who is their number one? I mean, Waller is essentially the number one receiver, so their number one passing target. And so, where do the rest of the guys fall in? And Darius Slayton and Isaiah Hodgins are outside receivers. They were number one on the depth chart at those positions. Not surprisingly, the Giants just put their depth chart out earlier this morning. Paris Campbell, the number one guy in the slot. Again, not really a surprise. I guess you could see Sterling Shepard getting in the mix there. Cole Beasley maybe, but he's kind of at the end of his career. Wan'Dale Robinson still on the shelf coming off the torn ACL. So, yeah, they do have some redundancies there in terms of slot guys, but, Wan'Dale Robinson's not going to be on the field for a while here. He got hurt in late November. So it looks like probably their three main receivers will be Campbell in the slot and Hodgins and Slayton outside. But, and here's the big but part of it, Jalen Hyatt has had a really good camp. He's a fascinating pick. They traded up to get him in the third round. They gave him a fourth rounder. We all saw what he did against Alabama, at Tennessee. He's a deep threat. But the question was, can he be more than just a straight runner, speed guy, skinny kid who can just run vertical routes out of the slot? And then he's been working outside receivers. He's listed as outside receiver on the depth chart, even though he has slot skills. He's got some reps of the first team, not a ton, but when he has, he's performed well. He's had a nice camp so far. He really has, and he's impressed these guys, this coaching staff, and his teammates. And again, I think there's more to it than just. So he looked like a really good route runner in practice, right? And that was a big question about him, route running. But you got to remember, the DBs can't be super physical with these guys in practice. They're not hitting them and cracking them off the line of scrimmage. So I'd be really interested to see how he handles that, that physicality, because he is a pretty skinny kid. He's really fast, but certainly adding some bulk is something he's going to have to continue to work on. But he's a fascinating player. He was their most fascinating draft pick just because of his skill set, and they traded up to get him and all that. I think it'll be really intriguing to see what kind of role he can carve out for himself here in August.
Yeah, that's for sure here. In terms of the defensive side, the big acquisition there was Bobby Okereke to play linebacker here. I feel like for a long time, the Giants sort of ignored linebacker here and sort of ahead of the curve of the league here. Now they bring him in to sort of be a key to know their defense. How has he fit in so far?
Yeah, so it's Bobby Okereke actually, but yeah, it's a tough one. But so Okereke, yeah, he's going to be their middle linebacker. We know that. That's not a question. The question obviously is how he performs and how he covers and all that stuff. Again, hard to know right now because they're not doing live tackling in training camp practices, and I doubt he plays in the game on Friday in Detroit. And yeah, so I think there are questions as they pertain to coverage and just their defense as a whole. Like, who is going to be their weak side linebacker? They had Jared Davis, who was going to be there. Again, he's not some sure thing star. He suffered a season-ending knee injury in the spring, so he's not even an option. So they're looking at either Darian Beavers, who was a 6th-round pick last year, or Mike McFadden, who was a 5th-round pick, and no proven option there among those two. Beavers didn't play last year, tore an ACL. McFadden was bad. Again, it was a rookie year for him, but he struggled. So that's a question. And I think the bigger question for this defense is in the back end. We know that what you're going to get from the defensive line. You know Okereke is going to be their middle linebacker. The weak side linebacker spot, which isn't an every down spot anyway, is up between those two guys I mentioned. But the back end is a question mark, right? So you have Adoree Jackson, their number one corner, and what about Deonte Banks? Like, what can he's going to start, right? So a 24th overall pick, they're going to start him. He's going to play on the outside. We know that. That's where he plays. Is he ready? Is he ready for the challenges that are ahead? And then what about their slot corner situation? Because that's obviously a really important role, right? I mean, Darren Waller isn't the only good player who plays out of the slot, either as a receiver or a tight end in the NFL. Darnay Holmes is the incumbent there in the slot. It looks like he's probably going to lose his job. Now, will he lose it to Cordell Flott, who is a slot guy, though he has played outside? Or what they've been doing, and this is really interesting, they've been playing Adoree Jackson in the slot because the quote-unquote other cornerback, their 6th-rounder rookie, Trey Hawkins, again, like people probably heard of this guy, Trey Hawkins III, Larry Hawkins III, goes by Trey, has out of ODU, Old Dominion, has played really well. Again, early, but he's exclusively a big-bodied outside corner. So if they wind up starting 2 rookies on the outside, which would kind of be crazy, then Adoree Jackson might be in the slot, and then they got to figure out at safety who replaces Julian Love, who's now in Seattle. That looks like it will be Jason Pinnock and not Bobby McCain, who they signed this offseason. But that's still technically up in the air. So the secondary is really fascinating group right now just because of so many potential moving pieces there.
Yeah, that's for sure here. I also want to ask about the 2nd-round pick they took, John Michael Schmitz, the center out of Minnesota, who was the rapid riser in the combine in season here. Like, do you have a shot to start at center?
Oh, he will be their starting center definitely week 1. I mean, they've abandoned all pretense that Ben Bredeson could challenge for that job. Ben Bredeson is not challenging for that job. He's never played center. It's not happening. He's going to be the Giants' left guard probably, unless Joshua Ezeudu overtakes him there. Ezeudu struggled as a rookie last year, 3rd-rounder, split some time with Bredeson, but ultimately Bredeson was the more consistent option there. So, I mean, they know what they're getting from Andrew Thomas at left tackle. He's great. So it's either Bredeson or Ezeudu at left guard. Probably Bredeson, I would say. John Michael Schmitz is their center. Again, not easy to be a rookie center. I mean, even though it's a shoo-in that he's going to start, it's not a shoo-in he's going to play well. So, and then Mark Lewinsky at right guard and Evan Neal at right tackle. They need Evan Neal to play a heck of a lot better than he did last year. Can he make that year 2 leap like Andrew Thomas did as in year 2, Thomas catapulting himself to, big money this offseason by how well he played in year 2. And then, of course, year 3. So, yeah, I think that there are certainly some questions on this line, not only about who will start, most specifically at left guard, but how the performance will be especially in terms of pretty much everybody except Andrew Thomas, right? What are you going to get from the other 4 guys?
Yeah, that's certainly a fair question here. And I do think one thing you're positive about as a Giant fan is that, like, they do have a couple of building blocks that Joe Schoen's able to lock up to extensions long-term, and Andrew Thomas, Dexter Lawrence got a big deal early in the offseason here. Like, I know that Dave Gettleman did not have a great track record here in terms of, like, his overall, like, talent acquisition here. Those 2 guys that he picked seem to have worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, he made his share of mistakes. drafting Saquon Barkley second overall was a mistake. Sorry, it just was. And then they took Will Hernandez in the second round, a guard who struggled. Been over this a million times. They should have taken Quentin Nelson in the first round and Nick Chubb in the second. Okay, so that's what they should have done. But yeah, and of course he made plenty of other like bad picks all the way. Just can go over DeAndre Baker, Kadarius Toney, the whole down the line. I mean, and Daniel Jones, pretty good pick. But like if he flops the next 2 years, maybe not a good pick. But yeah, Dexter Lawrence, Andrew Thomas, really good picks. Xavier McKinney's been a pretty good, quite a good second round safety. He's entering a contract year now. Really, he's eligible for a new contract, but they were never going to give him one this offseason. So he's entering a true contract year this offseason. And if they don't use the tag on Saquon Barkley again next year, maybe Xavier McKinney gets the tag. But we'll see how he plays. Got to play better than he did last year. So yeah, Dave Needleman made some good picks, made a lot of mistakes, and certainly a lot of bad signings too. Kenny Galladay, Nate Solder, my goodness. The Giants were always going to get Dexter Lawrence locked up this summer. That was always going to happen. The uncertainty was Andrew Thomas. I think the interesting thing there is that market could really explode next offseason. And you look at some of the guys who are going to come up next year, Sewell, Rashawn Slater, I'm missing somebody worse. And so, yeah, there was some thought here, and I asked Andrew Thomas about this, did you think about waiting? If you blew it up this year and you were better than all those guys, and then you waited till all those guys got paid next offseason, and then you tell the Giants, I want more than all of them. He got great money. He got a record contract, but who knows how long it stands. I think from his perspective, he's like, look, I just wanted, he's smart, right? Financial security. So is he gonna roll into this year and risk maybe getting hurt for a few $1 million more when he's already making, insane amount of money? He's a smart guy, and so I can totally understand that decision. So yeah, they got his deal done, and the next one up is McKinney, like I said, but it depends on how he plays, and it depends on whether they want to tag him and all that stuff, which depends on how he plays.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And obviously, this is the second year with Brian Daboll's camp. Returned some heads last year, how he ran camp this year. Any notable difference you've seen from year one to year two at Daboll at camp?
No, I mean, it's a pretty light camp. I mean, certainly lighter than Joe Judge. You saw that last year. He's not grinding these guys into the ground like Judge did, which was a total outlier approach. I think more and more you see this. The Bills run a pretty light camp too, and that's where he came from. And so a lot of workload management, a lot of, not only rest days for veterans, but back-to-back rest days. Leonard Williams, Azeez Ojulari have got back-to-back rest days lately. Now, they're probably managing some nicks and stuff that they're not detailing to us, but yeah, they're doing things like, they'll have a morning practice on a Tuesday, for like example's sake, Tuesday and Wednesday, and then on a Thursday they'll have an evening practice to give their guys, and then a rest, an off day the next day, to give their guys a little bit extra time to rest on that third day for just for an example's sake. So I think that's just in terms of his demeanor, he's been fiery at times on the field, and he's been very bland behind the podium at press conferences. That is standard issue Brian Daboll from what we've seen. Not going to give you a lot in terms of player assessments. Again, all of the same from last year. And I think you're seeing a camp that's being run similarly. I think that, last year they intentionally challenged Daniel Jones in camp, made it real hard for him, or at least that was the storyline that kind of came out. But, you see more comfort here between Daboll and Jones, and obviously Mike Kafka is back. He didn't leave for an NFL job, and he very wisely did not leave for Northwestern, which was insane, because he's eventually going to be an NFL head coach, if they keep performing well. So there you go. So I think that's what you see from Daboll. Pretty much most of the same in terms of how he's running things and how he's comporting himself.
Yeah, absolutely. My last question here is obviously in training camp that we have a situation, where you love seeing, who's this guy we never heard of, who's standing out of camp, turning heads, and he's the undrafted player, late round pick, who has a shot to force his way onto the roster. Who are those kinds of guys you're keeping your eye on for the Giants?
Who are the guys who have surprised?
Yes.
Trey Hawkins. I mean, this guy was a 6th-round pick. He was like the other corner. I mean, no one, I mean, and you're talking about he carved out a role for himself, or at least an opportunity for himself early on getting significant first team reps. It's like all of a sudden out of nowhere, he's getting these first team reps, and then not really out of nowhere, but he had played well, got these first team reps, and that maybe is going to result in Wink Martindale saying, hey, let's like play our best three corners. And maybe that's Hawkins, Banks, and Jackson in the slot, and the heck with Holmes or Flott in the slot. So yeah, I think that you've seen, you kind of knew Jalen Hyatt, a reasonably high pick. So he's done what he's seen, but Hawkins has been a revelation, I think, in this camp. As I'm going through the depth chart here in terms of other guys who have performed well, again, really hard to assess the offensive line, in how they're doing, and how these practices are conducted. A guy to keep an eye on is Eric Gray, a 5th-round rookie running back. I wouldn't say he's like flashed in a big way or surprised, but they're trusting him to probably be their punt returner with Richie James now in Kansas City, and that's an important role. I mean, forget kickoff return. Kickoff's been neutered by the NFL. It's kind of a meaningless play, but he could be out there fielding kickoffs too. So, we'll see how he does ball security and all that stuff in live action. I don't know if there's really anyone like who is like a bottom of the roster guy who has flashed or surprised, but I would say definitely Trey Hawkins at the top of that list in terms of guys who could unexpectedly thrust themselves kind of into a really important role there. And I think Pinnock at strong safety, you saw him start some games last year, and with McKinney gets the ATV accident, he goes out. They turn to Dane Belton, who was a rookie, struggled. Then they turned to Pinnock, who was a rookie in 2021 with the Jets, and the Jets cut bait on him, kind of surprisingly. But he signed a home with the Giants. He signed a home in his defense, and it looks like he'll probably be the starting strong safety, taking over for Julian Love. We thought Bobby McCain only signed a 1-year deal, but we thought Bobby McCain coming over from Washington would probably be that guy, but not the case. Bobby McCain actually 3rd on the depth chart behind Pinnock and Dane Belton right now at strong safety. Again, unofficial depth chart and all that, but I think that's been kind of a surprise there. Now, we knew who Pinnock was. I mean, we certainly knew who he was more so than Hawkins. And known quantity, but let's see how he does maybe as a week 1 starter. That'll be an interesting one to watch.
Yeah, certainly will, Darryl. Thanks for all the time. I really appreciate it. People want to follow you on social media and keep up with your coverage of the Giants. How can they do that?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it as always. And then it's just as usual, nj.com/Giants. My stuff's up there as well. Bob Brookover, who covers the Giants for us, is our primary beat writer. He's in Detroit right now. I'm actually not there. So be sure to go to nj.com/Giants. And I'm on Twitter at Darryl Slater, DARRYL SLATER. Appreciate you having me as always, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
All right, Darryl. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it.
All right, take care.